Well, good morning and welcome to the mobile ministry of Grace Chapel. We are a community of faith dedicated to serving as Christ ambassadors to our world. This 10-minute message, while brief, that I'm about to share with you, I believe will be beneficial to you and bring you both hope and encouragement as you face the challenges of your day. While a number of years separate my brother and I, we've remained close my entire life. In fact, we communicate with one another on a regular basis, whether it be through phone, text, or email. In a recent conversation with him, my brother randomly mentioned that he and his wife had been enjoying a particular brand of cheese produced and sold by a major university located in the Northeast. As he explained further, the cheese only comes packaged in 30-ounce tins and has to be refrigerated once open until it is completely consumed. Depending on how often they use the cheese, he stated, a tin could last from 1 to 3 months. He went on to comment, though, they properly store the tin of cheese, yet there was a relatively short amount of time that lapsed before it began to mold and deteriorate, and thus he indicated that was the only aspect of purchasing their favorite cheese, which was a little disappointing to them. Asking how they worked around that dilemma, he shared, well, until recently, we would simply cut out the moldy parts and try to preserve the rest the best we could. I responded, till just recently? What changed? And he told me they discovered that if you wrap cheese tightly in aluminum foil, it will not mold. Are you kidding me? I've never heard that before. My brother informed me they had been doing that and it worked quite well. Well, I certainly learned something new that day. But thinking about it further, I find there is an incredible as well as an insightful application. You see, in similar fashion, our lives are constantly being exposed to the elements of this world, and therefore we face, in turn, the same danger of deterioration. That's maybe why Jesus warned his followers that here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows. But, he says, take heart, because I have overcome the world. A follower of Christ is continually encountering trials, temptations, and troubles, and unless they are properly preserved, will fall prey to the danger of deterioration. That makes what Jesus says during the Sermon on the Mount, located in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, more sensible and significant for the person who is seeking to live a life that is pleasing to God. It is there that he says you are to be the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. In the simplest of terms, Jesus is merely telling us that we must guard our lives from the elements of this world and avoid losing our aspiration and ability to make a difference for Jesus in this world. In other words, we must properly preserve ourselves in order to live a life that is both pleasing and productive for God. So let's look briefly in the minutes we have remaining at how our lives can be properly preserved from deterioration. The first secret, or the first key, is to stay in God's presence. When the tin of cheese is shipped, it's vacuum sealed, where nothing on the outside can get to it and cause any type of deterioration. No concern about mold. Staying in God's presence is like being vacuum sealed, so the world is unable to get to you. As David wrote in the Psalms, you, God, hide them in the shelter of your presence, safe from those who conspire against them. You shelter them in your presence, far from accusing tongues. So not only can the elements of the world, not even the words of evil people can get to you. The elements of the world are kept from you when you stay in the presence of God. So you might be asking, well, how does a person get into the presence of God? Or Who can earn the right to get into the presence of God? Well, those are good questions. And Paul addressed them by saying God lets you stand in his presence. In fact, Jesus extends an invitation to all who are weary and heavy laden to come into his presence where he can give you rest. So staying in God's presence, which he allows and invites, will preserve you from the negative effects of the world. Second of all, surround yourself with God's protection. When my brother wrapped his yet-to-be-eaten cheese in the aluminum foil, he was surrounding his favorite food with what he knew would protect it from mold and deterioration. So every time he orders a new tin, it arrives, he opens it up, and he's prepared to wrap it in foil once again to preserve it. So Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 6, put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. He invites people who are seeking to serve God to surround themselves with God's armor. It is the aluminum foil of the follower of Christ. Surrounding yourself fully and tightly with God's armor protects you from the effects of the elements of the world. The armor, and only that armor, will preserve you from the negative effects of the world. If you put it on and you surround yourself with it, that's the key. But lastly, to preserve yourself, you can submerge yourself in prayer to God. David wrote in the Psalms as a testimony of thanks, I was in terrible trouble when I called out to you, but you've heard me from your temple and answered my prayer. It's really ludicrous, ridiculous, even preposterous to think someone who was seriously hurt would avoid going to see a doctor for help with their injury. Yet when a person is suffering emotionally, struggling mentally, or sinking spiritually, it's almost, again, ludicrous or ridiculous or preposterous to think that they don't turn to God. They refuse, they resist. But turning to God for help is what a person must do in order to preserve themselves from the trials, tribulations, and troubles the world will throw their way. Jesus faced them and therefore understands exactly what a person is encountering. So when you pray, he listens, and not only that, he hears and helps you to be preserved. The psalmist says, the Lord preserves the faithful. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who hope in the Lord. On the 4th of July, families, neighbors, and even communities will come together to observe some incredible fireworks display. Maybe you've been an observer of those annual events held in the area. Think about all the oohs and ahs that freely flow when the fireworks light up the sky. For perhaps 15 seconds, our eyes see the display, and we are moved to express our feelings. That is repeated over and over until the end of the fireworks show. Brilliant illuminations with each quickly evaporating into the evening sky. Now there are followers of Christ who live out their spiritual lives in that same manner. They burn hot for God for a short duration and then quickly burn out and return to their old way of life. Why? Because they were not properly preserved. And that's not what God is seeking. So what's the key to preserving your spiritual character and completing your spiritual work in the world without spoiling? Staying in God's presence, surrounding yourself with God's protection, and submerging yourself in prayer to God. Well, if you'd like to learn more, we invite you to stop in. We're here for a while and be ready to chat with you and share more insights on this subject. But if you're on the go, we understand. And you're more than welcome to connect with us, and we'll return that connection. And we're at grace.chapel.texoma. So until next time, grace for you.